Hello, esteemed audience and healthcare enthusiasts. Welcome to episode 6 of our Decoding AI in Healthcare series. I am Dr. Harshita representing MedSynapse, and today we are honored to have with us Dr. Tiffany Leung, an adjunct clinical associate professor at Southern Illinois University School of Medicine and scientific editorial director for JMIR Publications. Dr. Tiffany is a practicing telemedicine physician with US board certifications in internal medicine and clinical informatics. She's also a registered physician in the Netherlands. Dr. Tiffany is a co-chair of the Women in American Medical Informatics Association Steering Committee and past chair of the American College of Physicians Council of Early Career Physicians and current chair of the ACP Pan Asian Affinity Group. Dr. Leung is the 2022 recipient of the American College of Physicians Walter J. McDonald's Award for Early Career Physician and 2020 recipient of the Women in Medicine Summit's Stand With Her She's for She Award. Welcome, Dr. Tiffany.
Thanks for having me.
Next, I would like to extend a warm welcome to Dr. Amit Kumar Dey, a distinguished physician and diabetologist. Dr. Amit is not only a renowned expert in his field, but also a forward-thinking AI entrepreneur. His commitment to driving healthcare innovation through AI is truly inspiring. Dr. Amit, welcome.
Thank you very much, Harshita, for the introduction. And once again, a warm welcome to all our friends and viewers out there. In fact, it's now across the globe, and we are very happy with that. To the sixth episode of the Med AI podcast series. And today, we're going to talk about something very, very interesting. And I really thank Tiffany for joining us. And I must also introduce Dr. Tiffany as the scientific editorial director of the Journal of Medical Internet Research, which is a well cited and indexed journal across the globe. So, welcome, Tiffany. And today we're going to talk about a very interesting topic about using artificial intelligence in manuscript writing for medical research. We're going to kind of keep this discussion actually in two parts. I kind of named it as medical research and manuscript writing. I'm going to take up the aspect of manuscript writing with Tiffany because she has got a wide experience in as an editorial director, and she's going to share her insights about using artificial intelligence in the right way. So, without wasting much time, Tiffany, I'm going to start off, with a very simple question to you. Artificial intelligence in manuscript writing, with your experience as a scientific editorial director, what are your first thoughts on that, of the use of AI in manuscript writing, the good, bad, and the ugly?
Yeah, for sure. It's a really great question to start with. And so, again, thanks for having me here to be able to speak about this very important and very contemporary topic. I think for sure it's been a very very popular tool these days in a variety of different ways to be able to look at using artificial intelligence tools, particularly large language models or LLMs, which sort of burst onto the scene, I think, about a year ago, actually. So what do we think about in terms of, writing a good quality paper, right? I think you have to think about what makes a good quality paper in the first place, and then how can it potentially help? I do think the short answer is that there's a lot of opportunity, but there's also a lot of aspects of caution, I think, that have to be taken. Classically speaking, I think the obvious things that we think about and are concerned about are concerns about plagiarism, or namely AI plagiarism, where, for example, similar to when an author might write something that is taking a concept or idea, whether verbatim or not, and taking that and owning it themselves and saying, oh, this is my original idea, when in fact it may not be. There is also the concern about AI plagiarism, and thinking about, okay, if I'm going to ask AI to generate for me some text or a concept or summary about something, am I going to claim that that is something that I generated without disclosing? And so there is something simple like that that we think about first. But the bigger issue more generally that AI plagiarism falls into is ethical use of such tools in authorship of a manuscript. And so what does that mean in terms of ethical use? From the perspective of JMIR Publications, so as you mentioned, I work as the scientific editorial director for JMIR Publications. We actually are welcoming of authors and peer reviewers and editors to use potential AI tools like this in an ethical manner. What does that mean to be ethical? And so using it in an ethical manner means being transparent, disclosing, and also being considerate of potential confidentiality concerns. And so in order to be able to accomplish these things, being transparent, we'll start there, would mean that you have to be transparent about what exactly you did. How did AI, whether it's an LLM or other kind of AI-based tool, how was that used? And precisely what way was it used? Was it used to help, for example, refine text and used in an editing capacity? So for example, in situations where English may not be necessarily a first language for someone, and writing a scientific manuscript can be quite daunting in that respect. Similar to having a human editor or a friend or a colleague or somebody to try to help edit your text, can it potentially be appropriate to use AI to help you edit and refine something that you've already written independently? Being transparent would mean that you're transparent about what exactly you did. What tool did you use? What version of the tool did you use? And how did you use it in order to be able to contribute to what you've produced? The second aspect then is disclosure. So I started touching on this already about saying what exactly you're using. So if you use ChatGPT, for example, an OpenAI tool, which version of it did you use? And what exactly are the prompts and outputs that may have come out of it? And so for us, we actually would strongly advise that authors actually include as part of appendices or supplementary material to indicate what exactly did you do with the specific tool and version of it that you did. And finally, the aspect of confidentiality as an author is considering what kinds of material you put into it. And so I think this is going to be the case for any kind of tool where if you pay close attention to the user terms of use and agreement for the kind of tool that you have, if you use, for example, a free version of an LLM tool that's out there, not one that you have, for example, fine-tuned yourself or otherwise have developed on your own, then there's the potential that, for example, prompts and inputs into a particular tool, they can be actually reused for training and other purposes, which may breach other potential copyright or other issues that may occur. And so those are things that I think as a starting point are very important to be able to address in terms of thinking about ethical use of AI in manuscript generation and writing.
Yeah, I think that's quite an extensive overview to start with, which you have given. And if I can just add to that for our viewers, I'm sure there would be a lot of us, med school students, postgrads, who would be probably starting to write. And the first sort of a thought that would come to your mind is if you want to start off with putting your idea on a blank slate on an AI page, and you want artificial intelligence to kind of write entire thing down, you will be completely misled there. I mean, what Tiffany just spoke about is a little bit of an automation bias because, again, that the content that is getting produced is being reused, used and reused for improving the content. So yes, there is a bias that would come into the writing that you're coming. Having said that, if you have a content and you're putting in that content and you're using it for refining that content, maybe in the form of the language or in the form of the way you want to structure it, AI tool would probably go a better way in helping you out in this. I think that's a good summary that Tiffany has given us. So to go on, Tiffany, even for an author, I mean, almost all of us who've been writing manuscripts, would be new in using an AI tool, and it is something which is useful. At the same time, it needs to be used uh, in a proper way. Otherwise, you end up
Mhm.
misusing it. So, where does an author
Right.
start from, and what are some of the guidelines that they should follow?
Right, right. Yeah. So I mean, I think you bring up some really good points, and we didn't quite get there yet, but we're still at the top of the hour here. So things like because of, for example, in the large language models, there is the potential to generate false content, as you started hinting at, right? It does have difficulty with creating, for example, oh, you want to prompt it to say, tell me more about, clinical condition X. Can you provide me references to support that information? Sure. The output that's going to come from your prompt is like, here's a reference for what I just told you. And yet you'll find if you try to find that reference, it's completely hallucinated by the way the AI works, right? And so I think just like
Right.
with, let's say, if we're thinking about clinical decision support tools in clinical practice as a physician, when you're using writing support tools, you have to know how they work and what's underlying them. These models were not really intended to tell you, at least the ones that we have started using in the broader public as of last year. They were not really intended to give you these references in completion and correctly. That's why when we find these things and we ask these prompts, they can give you the wrong information or they can mislead you. They sound nice, they sound very conversational, and they're said in such a confident sounding way or style that you might ask it to write, but they're completely wrong. And so this gets back to also the first question of ethical use, right? If you are going to use it to help you in that sort of idea generation, or even just like as a sounding board, right? That's not a bad thing to do, just to think about ideas and framing questions and things like that. But you have to be aware that there is this potential that you're getting hallucinated or incorrect, or maybe very loosely generalized information to be nice, right? And so you ultimately are accountable as the author or as the person using it for verifying and fact checking the information that you're going to get out of it, that you might be potentially either paraphrasing or otherwise adapting or adopting for your use.
Yeah, that kind of brings me to one of the paper that you've just published, in fact, in JMIR, about best practices for using AI tools. Now, we've spoken about the authors. That's just one part of a publication. And we know that
Right.
in a good publication, you need a good editor and a good reviewer. And in this paper, you and your colleagues have beautifully mentioned about how you can use artificial intelligence with accountability and at the same time ethically maintaining credibility. So, what are your
Mhm.
viewpoints in terms of the editors and the reviewers?
Yeah, so that's great. And thanks for asking about that particular paper. So that paper is an editorial. It's intended to set editorial policy for our publishing house, essentially, for all the journals that we publish. So you mentioned the Journal of Medical Internet Research. We also have 30 plus journals in the portfolio. And so they all would adhere to the same policy that we've published about the potential for using these tools. Now, I think it's the topic of the use of AI for authors has been much more commonly discussed. And in fact, the sort of approach of transparency, disclosure, confidentiality, that approach is not necessarily an original one, right? We're sort of synthesizing our policy based upon best practice recommendations from existing bodies such as the World the World Association of Medical Editors, I think it is. Yeah, WAME. And also other societies like the Council of Science Editors from COPE, which is essentially the go-to body for publication ethics concerns. And so in some sense, we're synthesizing all of these best practices into things that are usable for our journals. Now, that being said, thinking about not just authors using AI, back to your question about peer reviewers and editors, I think the same principles apply. I mean, it's quite sensible to say you have to be transparent, you have to disclose. I mean, it would not be a nice thing to be an author to see, peer review report that looks like it was AI generated and very generic, and then find out later that it wasn't disclosed that was the case. to me, a high quality peer review, it should still do all the things that a high quality peer review should provide. It should provide constructive, respectful content to authors about their manuscript, about its novelty, about its impact, about areas for improvement, and providing that critical, constructive criticism as an expert in the field. Now, can AI help you do that? Yeah, it probably can help you do that also when you're providing a peer review. But then you have to remember being transparent and disclosing as the peer reviewer how you've used it to help you generate a peer review report. And also the aspect of confidentiality, especially for peer reviewers and editors, is especially important. Because as you can imagine, for example, if you're a scholar and you've written a manuscript and submitted it in confidence to a publisher, that they're going to have it in a closed peer review process, presuming that's the process you want to go through, then you're going to expect that your manuscript, which is unpublished work and potentially your proprietary work and research on a new topic or area or therapy or whatever that is, that's going to be kept confidential. That is especially important. And again, the reason why anybody who engages with use of AI tools should understand what exactly they're sharing and disclosing in such a tool to get the outputs. And so again, going back to the terms of use of particular tools, you as the user have to fully understand what exactly you're giving it and how that information you're providing is going to be potentially reused. Because in that case, you're breaching that confidentiality as a peer reviewer or editor. If you are like copying and pasting content from a manuscript that somebody has submitted for peer review into one of these tools to help you write a peer review. So I think the bottom line there is you could use it, but you have to use it with caution and with a thorough understanding of what the tool is going to do with the information you have, because these sorts of concerns are very real. Now, I should add a caveat here. So the caveat being, I mentioned about if you elect to go through the traditional peer review process, right? And we also know that there are preprint servers out there, medRxiv being a very popular one, but there are many more of them. And so preprints are publicly available. And for JAMR publications in particular, we also have an open peer review process where authors can submit a manuscript and elect for their manuscript to become a preprint, and then go through an open peer review where peer reviewers from outside the system can elect and choose to say, oh, this paper is in my field of expertise and very interesting. I would like to write a peer review about it. Now, in those cases, the confidentiality is perhaps a little bit less of a concern because authors have already consented to having their manuscript available for open peer review. It requires a level of sensitivity and a certain level of understanding of, these sort of nuances. And so again, I think going back to use with caution and use with transparency, disclosure, and mindfulness of the confidentiality clauses around this, then you probably can use these tools carefully and in adherence to the best practices that are out there for scholarly publishing in general.
Yeah, point taken. And I'll just kind of bring out one very important point from what you just said is that as a peer reviewer, if you're looking at copying and pasting it on an AI tool and getting a critic out of it, you would be completely getting a biased answer. So you have to be kind of using it with a lot of caution. The whole context of kind of getting a good output from any AI tool lies in the art of giving the right prompt and then getting the desired output, using the technology of prompt engineering. So I guess that is where when you're using an AI tool, whether as an author, as a reviewer, or even as an editor, you have to put in the right prompt so that you know exactly what support what support you can get out of the AI tool to refine your work. So that makes it quite interesting. But having said that, Tiffany, I mean, whether the role is of an author, reviewer, or an editor, there will always be a fine line of ethics in the context of using AI. How do you see that, from the chair of an editorial director of a scientific journal?
Yeah, I mean, I think the ethical use has to do with a lot of these principles that I'm mentioning, right? Is that if you use it, you have to be transparent. You have to disclose. You have to be able to give the proper information to the receiver of the information you're going to be providing so that that can be accounted for, right? And ultimately, the bar is going to be what we expect as a standard. The manuscript should still be a high quality, rigorous scientific study that's reported well, reads well, has all the appropriate content and figures. You know, if you're supposed to be providing, for example, a systematic literature review, you should provide all the components that a systematic literature review should have. You should be explaining it and communicating it clearly using best practices in scientific communication. If you're going to be a peer reviewer or an editor and you're writing peer review reports, and like I said before, it's got to be a high quality peer review report. It can't be some generic language that's going to be, you know, totally unusable and not useful for an author. And then, of course, as an editor, if you're going to use it in some way to, let's say, try to help you synthesize peer reviewer comments into something that's usable for you as an editor, well, again, you have to be very careful about sort of being able to disclose that you're using it in a particular way and ensure that the quality matches what you would expect of, you know, the manual quality and time and effort that you would put into that work. So the standards in terms of the output should be exactly the same, whether or not an AI tool is used. And the disclosure is important because then the receiver of the information can take that into account if necessary. You're also, when you're disclosing, not taking credit for something that you didn't completely do yourself. So there are aspects like that which I think are very important to account for, and in that way we can be ethical about using it in all the different places that we're sitting in scholarly publishing. I do think I want to come back to the point that you mentioned about prompt engineering, which is incredibly important, and that's, you know, what the kind of quality of and specificity of what you're asking for matters in terms of being able to get that higher quality output versus some generic, like, write me a peer review on this manuscript. That's not going to help you. I think there are going to be ways that you can be more precise in your own human read of the content. And then you can narrow in on places where there can be ways to be able to pull out constructive comments and pieces to be able to point out. And ultimately, in the end, the idea is that, of course, if you're using it to help you, to support you, you know, like the writing support tool or the peer review support tool, however you want to think about it, you're probably going to want to make sure that when you know, read through what's output, that it really is something that you would actually genuinely and authentically say about what you're reviewing, right? If you don't stand behind that and you're not going to be willing to take accountability for those words that are on the page as one of those three stakeholders, then you should not be submitting that actually in that role. So you have to have the final say and the final accountability. And, you know, I use again sort of the analogy, right, about clinical decision support tools as a clinician is ultimately you make the final decision as the clinician, right? It's a decision support tool. It's not intended to replace you. And I think as a scholar, if you're a writer or a peer reviewer or an editor, you don't want that AI tool to replace you because your judgment and your writing is yours. So you should be the one that's making that final decision.
I think that is a very important statement you made there. I mean, it's got to be your voice that goes up and not the AI voice that goes up in the paper. And that brings me also to an important thought that if somebody is using artificial intelligence, let's say a generative AI LLM like ChatGPT, can ChatGPT be an author, Tiffany?
Great question. It's an easy one to answer, actually. And the answer is no. The short answer is no, let's put it that way. I think that was actually probably one of the, let's say in the early part of 2023, was a great debate initially in scholarly publishing communities. I think the general consensus is quite clear that the answer is no. And artificial intelligence should not be a co-author because of inability to be accountable. So whatever is output from the AI, you can't hold them accountable for the output, whether it's an LLM or
Yes,
something else, right? It's what I just said, which is that the human is accountable for the output. And so
absolutely.
therefore, AI cannot be an author.
Yeah, so that just syncs with the way we look at using AI tools probably in clinical practice. I mean, the result of the output, you will be accountable for it and not the AI tool. I mean, that's always a debate that we have simultaneously happening in the clinical world. So now with AI in place, we know that AI is going to have a big place in medical research, in writing, and in the field of healthcare. You know, in the way papers are written, the way it is reviewed, the way it is published, do you really see or you expect that there's going to be a paradigm change coming in this era of generative AI?
I think yes. It's very interesting because I sort of, although generally speaking, I've been in the scientific editorial director role for, just over a year at this point. It's just very interesting to see the excitement in the scholarly publishing community, scientific publishing communities, around the potential for these tools to make some of these processes more efficient. I mean, you could imagine, for example, we're talking about this idea of having, AI supported peer review writing. If there really were tools that were able to help with supporting a high quality peer review simulation and generation, there are aspects of publishing that could be much more efficient for the publishing of science for authors, right? That could be fantastic to have as such a tool. And then also, being able to publish impactful work in a timely manner. So I think there are, again, a lot of cautions here. This is very much blue sky. I don't know that we're quite there yet, but I think there is a lot of excitement about the opportunities to be able to apply AI in ways that are creative and ways to be able to make the overall publishing process more efficient and more supportive of all the people who are involved in doing it.
Yeah, and I'm pretty certain that most of us who've been exploring artificial intelligence tools would be quite eager to use artificial intelligence into getting best output out of your writing. And I feel it's nothing wrong, but just that you got to use it with caution, with accountability, with credibility, because at the end of the day, it's your voice that you're trying to portray and not the AI voice. And that's something that we need to kind of keep it at the back of our mind whenever we are using AI, and you don't let that take away your cognitive thinking. So going into the context of the journals, you know, how do you see the journals adapting to the use of this AI tools in terms of the editorial policies? Even, for example, a journal like JMIR.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think publishing or editorial was one way to be able to respond to the sort of current environment and what's available to scientists out there, people who are producing research and doing research. So it'll be very interesting to see. I mean, I think generally speaking, there have perhaps from an author's standpoint, there have not been a lot of times because we're now enforcing this policy, for example, right? We ask authors, have you used generative AI in the production of your manuscript? And if you have, please disclose that how you have, right? For us, we sort of require this as a part of publishing the manuscript. There should be a statement in the manuscript that says a statement or a few statements, if necessary, covering all these issues. How exactly was it used? What version was used? And then if appropriate, also providing the prompts and responses in a supplementary material. So that does have actual pragmatic translation of the editorial policy adoption into operations and how we interact with authors and what we require of authors to do, for example. I'm not sure if that quite answered your question exactly. Can you remind me again what the other part was?
Yeah, so I just my thought was that how the journals are going to adapt to the editor, in terms of changing their editorial policies, and I think you were quite there, and I think this is an evolving sort of a platform that we are all there on, and I think the policies are also going to get to evolve as we get to understand these AI tools better. Perhaps there could be a time where the journals would be recommending an AI tool for kind of streamlining your work. And that actually brings me to my next question to you, Tiffany. I mean, being a part of a journal, even I have seen, and you would know it very, very well, that the entire editorial process is quite a task. And no wonder certain times journals takes more than 3 months and 6 months to kind of go through the process of reviewing and editing a paper. And and it's a tedious process. So can there be a place for artificial intelligence tools in streamlining these repetitive tasks of editorial processes which a journal has to go through?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, you could start even with very simple things too, for example, right? So finding information and summarizing it can actually be something that could be a sort of tedious task that AI could actually help with quite a lot. Um, I can give an example. For example, every journal has things like, author instructions, various editorial policies about things exactly like this, in using AI as an author, peer reviewer, editor. What are some of the actual concerns? So there are some things like copyright concerns as well that can come up. In any case, now, I mean, our traditional way is you go to a journal, you find the pages where you want to find the answers, and you scroll through, you find the section where you want it, right? It could be feasible where there are ways where we could use AI to try to help with streamlining the finding of the information, and also be able to offer that as a support tool for whoever might be engaging with a particular journal. And in that way, maybe it can help with making sure that it's like, okay, you're looking for this precise answer for this specific situation. Okay, well, based on that, given what this AI can find about the editorial policies for this journal or this publisher or the set of, publishers or whatever it is, it could be potentially very useful to provide a customized scenario where it can provide you that answer quite readily and actually do so properly with the right information rather than anything hallucinated. There are ways where things like that could be very helpful rather than, you have like a whole conversation through email with a human staff member who's like, okay, here, find this information. Here's the link. Here, let me copy and paste this section. So there's things like that, which are very simple administrative things where maybe that could be quite helpful. There are potentially things that could be more advanced. So there are various AI productivity tools that are out there now, of course. There always have been, but they've been sort of evolving very quickly this year too, where you can have whole workflow automations of, if let's say somebody, an external party submits a form or an application, and provides certain information in certain ways, you could automate subsequent steps of what things are supposed to happen in response to that rather than having a human handling every single step along the way. I could take, for example, Amit, you applied to and joined one of our editorial boards as an associate editor for JMIR Diabetes. And so you could imagine, for example, there could be ways to try to automate some of that process, right? Rather than going through multiple different steps and information and forms to fill out and things like that, it could be something that could be much more streamlined with the use of AI as well. So there are absolutely ways where you can imagine that there could be automations to help with streamlining a lot of administrative or sort of repetitive things that are done according to whatever the operations are of a particular publisher or company in general, frankly. So those are sort of interesting ways that we're exploring actually to be able to try to make the experience much more streamlined and more efficient, not only for our staff, but also as an experience for editors, for authors, and also peer reviewers, of course, too. So.
Yeah, and I think it can all start from selecting the right journal for you. I think that's also a place where authors spend a lot of time. When you have a manuscript ready, you're looking around, you're searching around the internet, and you're trying to figure out that which particular journal I should go for, and what is the index and what is the site score of the journal. I'm sure there are websites that can help you out, but if there can be a dynamic AI tool to assist you in kind of looking at your manuscript and kind of giving you a right journal, of course, there's going to be always an issue of copyright and stuff like that. But I mean, that would be a start. From the place of the editorial board and the work of the managing editors and the section editors, I feel there could always be a place of an AI tool helping you with the proofreading, in the allocation of the reviewers, reaching out to the reviewers with the right specialty so that the right paper can go to the right reviewer. I mean,
Mhm.
the typical tasks that an AI tool can do is kind of give you the right target to reach out to for the right kind of a paper. So I think that's where the AI automation can really help not just the authors, but at the same time, like you said, the editorial team as well as the reviewers, and who knows, we might just have some quick fix publishing solutions coming up. I mean, you submit, and it's, I mean, I know that in JMIR we have got this fast tracking thing, and you might just have something coming up in 7 days. Because recently, when I was doing some work with artificial intelligence, I realized that by the time one submits, especially with the pace that which AI is moving, by the time you submit your work into a journal, and by the time it gets published, probably your work is already outdated because AI has moved ahead, because it took you 3 months to kind of publish your work, and 3 months is a lot of time in the domain of artificial intelligence, because it's changing so fast. So again, from the chair of an editorial board, would you prefer using, or would you recommend journals to use any of such AI tools which can actually help authors in structuring their paper as per the specific requirements of the journal during the submission process?
Mm.
Because that too is a tedious task.
Mm.
Tiffany?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I completely agree with you. That can be a tedious task. um, so I think to address the comment you made earlier about journals or publishers using various tools, for example, for peer review matching to manuscripts, there are ways to do that. And there are actually quite a few different companies that are out there who create their own proprietary services and attempt to do this. It's a total gold mine if you have a really great peer reviewer matching tool for a publisher to be able to use that for their journals. And so there's no shortage, tech startups in healthcare, there's no shortage of those, right? And it's a huge industry. In scholarly publishing, same thing. There are tons of startups that are out there that are attempting to do various things like this to be able to help with the peer reviewer matching question and issue that is, of course, ever present for the publication of peer-reviewed scientific articles, among a variety of other really interesting tasks and processes. So this is definitely an active area of development and growth also in the publishing industry. Now, to your question about, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, please carry on.
I was just going to shift to answer the question you actually asked, because I wanted to provide a comment based upon, or a response based on what you were saying before. So,
Right.
the question you actually asked me, which was about using AI to help reformat a paper into a particular format, I got to tell you, it is quite painful, right? To have to do all those, let me put these things into these particular sections, and make sure that it's of this length, or figures are put here, tables are put there. I think if there is an opportunity to sort of prompt an AI tool to help you with that process, by all means, that would be fantastic. I mean, we don't have a ready to go tool. Stick your paper in this AI oven, and it'll come out a fully baked, well formatted, proper length paper for submission to this journal. I'm not sure that I've seen one of those yet for any journal, but I would love to. It would be very interesting to see, because maybe that would actually drive authors to try to submit to such a journal more often.
Yeah, I
but
guess
you're
that's
right,
gonna
that's one of many. Yeah, it's
yeah,
one of
that's going to
many
be out there
potential
soon. That's
tedious.
going to be out there soon, and that would probably be encouraging the authors to probably submit, their article in a less cumbersome way, and probably help them also choose the right journal for submitting their article. There's a very interesting kind of a question that comes to my mind here, that one big challenge for editors that we see in a journal is detecting plagiarism. So could there be, just like there are plagiarism detecting tools, could there be AI detecting tools that could kind of scan through your work and say, oh, no, it's not your work, it's done by an, and we are not taking this in our journal? Could there be a possibility of having an AI detection tool?
I think it's already a work in progress. Not by me personally. But yeah, it's definitely, there's a need for it, right? Because there are going to be, unfortunately, there are going to be some bad actors out there who will try to, take credit for something that they produce through AI, right? That AI plagiarism issue I mentioned at the very beginning. And so, yes, you're right. There are absolutely, industry practice, ready to use softwares out there for similarity checking and for plagiarism detection. The tools that are out there for AI plagiarism stand to be improved. I think it was GPT-0 was the tool that was developed to help with AI plagiarism, and its effectiveness is somewhere under 50% in terms of being able to identify AI plagiarism. Human detection of AI plagiarism also can be quite challenging. Although that being said, there are some giveaways sometimes that can be an indicator. So there's this concept of tortured phrases where, for example, some sort of turn of phrase is like otherwise mutated and said in a very unusual way, which can come off as, is that a potential red flag for possible AI plagiarism? An example, actually, I think that I had come across was like, instead of saying artificial intelligence, which is quite commonly recognized and understood, I think the replacement was something like created consciousness or something like that. And it's sort of like, that's strange. I think like maybe what they actually meant was artificial intelligence. And in this way, these sort of common turns of phrase that we sort of recognize, or expressions that we recognize, have become something else because it's gone through some process of changing by an AI. And so those kinds of things can be detectable, well, by a human or by a system. But nevertheless, AI plagiarism checkers, like, that's something that we really, really need more of, actually. There was actually, I think, a very recent, just maybe in the past week or past days, there was a paper that was published. I'll have to pull it up and send it to you. That where some researchers had developed a machine learning based tool to try to help with AI checking, and it actually did quite a bit better than in terms of its performance than GPT-0. But it's more research based, right? It's not really an industry tool that's available out there for usage in general practice yet.
Yeah, but I'm certain that that is certainly something that is need of the hour, because if we want quality writing to come, quality human-generated writing to come into the journals, we got to have a good, strong detection tool. Having said that, it's quite a challenge, because sometimes we definitely see that the fast pace at which generative artificial intelligence is evolving, and the way that these large language models are kind of getting better day by day, detecting plagiarism using AI is also going to become a challenge. I mean, both for a human as well as for an AI tool to detect AI plagiarism. I think that could be quite an irony at the same time too. So I guess we have come to the end of our session, and I guess we had some very good, important thoughts coming from you on artificial intelligence and its use in manuscript writing for the authors, for the editors, for the reviewers, for the editorial team, as well as for the journals. And I'm sure a lot of reviewers and editors would be listening to this podcast, and they would be kind of getting in some inputs as to how to go ahead with this use of artificial intelligence in the right way, with the right frame of mind. I think that is very, very important. So before we go back to Harshita with some questions from the audience, because this is a live podcast, I would really like to hear from you some important take-home message for the authors who are planning to submit work in the era of artificial intelligence.
Mhm. Yeah, so maybe a few takeaways would be use with caution. um, and in that sense, the use with caution refers to fact checking and being accountable for the outputs. AI does not replace humans. So as we said, and as you said very nicely, is that protecting your own human voice on something when you're writing it is incredibly important. And indeed, it's an AI writing support tool, very much like clinical decision support, as we were saying. So use with caution, you maintain your voice and be accountable, and ensure that you're ethical. And that is referring back to being transparent and disclosing and being mindful of the confidentiality concerns. I think if those are a few principles to take away, then I think that would be a very good starting point to be able to make sure that if you are thinking about using any of the publicly available, AI or generative AI tools that are out there, that you're using with caution and, complete understanding of what the implications are for you as an author.
Completely agree with you on that. And with that note, I would like to bring in Harshita. Although this is a little kind of a different kind of a topic that we keep discussing in our podcast, but I'm sure our audience would be coming back with some questions for this captivating discussion. Harshita, any questions from our live audience?
Yeah, we have received a couple of questions. So let's take the first one. So could you discuss the potential biases associated with AI generated medical content in research papers?
Well, that's an interesting question, Tiffany.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's absolutely potential for bias, right? I think it's already known even that the training information that's used on some of these large language models, that they're biased in various social, cultural, and political ways, right? So for example, I think I saw a talk from a very renowned informatics professor who described, for example, if you were to ask an LLM to tell you, what is it, like a fairy tale, right? Or a folk story, the training set will determine what kind of story you're going to hear. It can potentially mean you're going to hear a story about a very Western-based sort of story of a person or a child growing up or going through some hardships and then learning something at the end, right? But those kinds of stories are not the same globally, right? And it's a very simplistic, and I'm obviously not explaining this quite as well as she did. But the idea is that the training set is going to determine the kind of information you're going to get out of it that's generated. And I think it's very true that if there is potential for bias, and we know that there are publication biases in the body of already published literature, right? You are potentially going to get biased outputs. So it's a really great question. It's not yet, as far as I know, something that's measured in terms of how much bias or how much that influences, but it is a very important aspect of the implications that we have to understand when we engage with these kinds of tools.
I can kind of think of three very important bias. One is, of course, publication bias, which Tiffany just spoke about. The other one would be automating bias. I think that is something that we have to be very, very careful when we are using any AI tool for any matter. I mean, the more the automation process is, the more there is a risk of getting biased information. And of course, the other one is going to be a confirmation bias that could also come out, in when you're using these particular tools with the same context. So I'm sure there could be many more biases coming out. That's why you have to be very careful when you're using any artificial intelligence tools, not just for manuscript writing, but for any work that is pertaining to your field of expertise. So Harshita, what's the next question?
Yeah, so the next question is, what skills or knowledge do medical researchers and writers need to work effectively with AI systems when preparing manuscripts?
Tiffany.
Yeah, I think we talked about some of them, right? I mean, some of them are going to be understanding the tool that you're going to be using and how can you most effectively engage with it in terms of, for example, if you're going to use LLMs, then the prompt aspect to be precise and specific about what you want to get out of it. You're only going to, it's like the garbage in, garbage out expression, right? So if you ask a very generic question, you're going to get a very generic answer. So the more precise you are, the better you are setting yourself up to get a more useful response, which again, you have to fact check and verify that the information that you're getting as the output is correct. Additional skills, I think the skills are going to be all the sort of standard things, and a lot of these skills we sort of learn through formal means and reading lots of scientific papers, right? But also other unofficial means. I hear very commonly, for example, that PhD students or medical students or any kind of graduate students, they don't get really any formal training in how to do, for example, peer reviews, right? And I think that commonly can happen when people are writing research papers as well. If you don't really get a formal training in it, someone's mentoring you through the process. You write a paper. I mean, I'm sure my first paper that I wrote was awful. I don't really remember it though, thankfully. But the idea being is that, you just have to read a lot and practice a lot. And hopefully you have a good variety of very thoughtful mentors around to be able to guide you as well. Formal teaching is not often available for some of these skills, but I think finding the right resources and places to be able to learn and practice and to be able to, take critical feedback, right? To be able to submit a paper and deal with potential rejection. That's something also to develop too, because of course the rejection is based on hopefully good quality, constructive peer reviews and criticisms, which you can then take back as feedback on how to improve your skills. So there are a lot of these things that really have nothing to do with any of the AI topics that we're talking about that I think would be very valuable to be able to help as a researcher to develop your skills as a writer and researcher.
Yeah, and just to add to that, if you're talking in context of AI, one very important skill you'd really want to kind of learn and kind of relearn is the art of prompting. And I think most of us would be kind of exploring the use of artificial intelligence in the context of manuscript writing. You're looking at the generative AI tools because and to the specific content of using multimodal AI. I mean, converting any form of text, image, or audio into any other form of text, image, and audio. So I think whenever you're using the multimodal AI tools, you have to know the exact prompts to put in so that you can get the desired output. And I mean, the technical term is prompt engineering, but the way we look at it, it's more of an art that you learn, and you learn it by uh, giving repeated prompts with the same content so that you till you get the best desired output. I think that is also a skill that most people using AI tools will have to learn. It can come through training, but it can also come to repeated use and repeated kind of prompting. I think that's the best way of learning how to make the best use of AI tools. So yeah, I guess the smartness of mankind will once be judged by the quality of the prompts they tend to give in into the AI tools, perhaps in the days to come. That's something we were discussing the other day in one community discussion on artificial intelligence. So I guess with that note, we come to the end of a fantastic discussion today, and we have taken kind of quite a deep focus into the use of artificial intelligence tools in writing manuscripts for medical journals, which can be sometimes quite a learning task. And perhaps artificial intelligence tools will be there to make your work easier. But at the same time, having said that, I would kind of take away from what Tiffany said that it cannot be a replacement to your voice. It has to be the human voice that comes out in your manuscript and not the AI voice. So, with that, we will come to the end of today's episode. I once again thank Tiffany. She's traveling, yet she kind of made some time to join us with her insights and valuable inputs. Thank you very much, Tiffany, for joining in today. And I will hand it back to Harshita. And we will be back with the next episode with Deepu as the co host. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Tiffany and Dr. Amit, for sharing your insights on the impactful role of AI in medical research and manuscript writing. It's clear that AI is transforming the way we approach research and academic writing in the medical field. And for our audience, I encourage you to explore the opportunities presented by AI in your research and writing endeavor. Keep an eye on developments in this rapidly evolving field and don't hesitate to embrace these innovations in your work. Mark your calendars for November 21st as we return with our next episode, where our experts will guide us through the strategies that organizations need to adopt to thrive in the AI-powered landscape. So make sure to tune in on the 21st of November for another engaging episode. And before we conclude, I encourage you to explore our MedSynapse platform. It offers a unique opportunity to engage in enriching discussions, connect with esteemed medical professionals, and contribute to the progress of healthcare. Once again, thank you to our speakers and for shedding light on this important topic. And thank you to our audience for joining us today. Until next time, stay curious and stay informed. Goodbye.